Welcome to the broadcast. My name is John Mayfield, the real estate tech guy, and I said we may not do live streaming today, but here I am. So thanks for joining. Don't forget, you can always type in a question if you want to ask a question, and I'll be glad to answer those questions. So it looks like we are broadcasting loud and clear. Again, my name's John Mayfield. I go by the business tech guy or the real estate tech guy, either one. We're broadcasting every day, Monday through Friday, 4 to 5 p.m. during this horrible coronavirus outbreak that has shut businesses down and even delayed some of the testing. So I'm trying to help all of my students out. But hopefully you're watching us from anywhere around the country. We appreciate that. And we are covering national content only. So don't worry, we're not going over any state material. And of course, these videos will be on YouTube, so you can go back and check out any of the content we've covered over the last months, weeks, and days. So subscribe to our YouTube channel. That would mean a lot. Even some nice comments would be great as well. And hey, if you like a podcast format, be sure and go to iTunes or Podbean. That's where I host my podcast, but they shoot out to Spotify and also to iTunes. So feel free to check those out and subscribe there as well. The easiest way to find the iTunes podcast is to go to Google, maybe on your mobile phone, and from Google type in Global Real Estate School Podcast. All of that, Global Real Estate School Podcast. That'll take you right to that website. Okay? Well, good. I appreciate you. And I have my brand new little course. I had the logo up there. My Real Estate Exam Coach. It's designed for anyone preparing for the real estate exam. It's available in all 50 states, or it covers the national content. So it doesn't matter what state you're in. We've used it some. You can probably search some of our videos on YouTube and get a feel and a look of it. But we're using the regular course content material for today's session, and we're using the unlocked version, the review side. But check it out, My Real Estate Exam Coach. You know, by the way, Global Real Estate School students get that for free. So you're paying me a lot of money for your real estate school, so I want to make sure that you get that as a useful tool as well. Okay, I'll get rid of the My Real Estate Exam Coach icon. I might bring it back on occasionally. It's kind of nice when I can bring up things like my name and welcome to Global Real Estate School. So anyway, we're good to go. So tomorrow at 11 a.m. from my Business Tech Guy TV web channel, just go to Business Tech Guy TV, and you'll actually get to see some tech tools and tips and things I'm doing. So anyway, we do that tomorrow from 11 to 12. I'm trying to show technology, and I've got some cool things planned for tomorrow. So, and it's stuff you can use in your real estate business. We need to talk about real estate, though. Let's get into it. Right now, I'm going to jump over here to my computer screen, and we are going to go into the Missouri module. Now, again, don't panic if you're in South Dakota or Indiana, Kansas. Remember that you're going to see this when you log into the dashboard and you click on your appropriate Oklahoma. You're going to see this module. If you come over here and you minimize the arrow, you can kind of come down and see there's the practice course. Some states require you to take a post-license course. And then you will see the review modules. And remember, the review modules are unlocked, so you can use the menu, jump around wherever you want to. We just wrapped up number 7, and I wanted to go into next, and I should have had this pulled up, but if you'll give me a half a second, I will be able to pull this up and tell you what content I want to go over next. And I actually have this up, so we want to go into I want to jump down to module 20. Right here, 20 and 21. Oh, that's in the study sessions. Am I in the review modules? Here we go, and we want to go down here to chapter 20. There we go. That's what I wanted. I went down too far. My apologies. Now notice, even in the main course, if you want to resume where you left off, you can, or you can hit restart. I'm going to hit resume because it really doesn't matter where I'm at, because remember I said you can use the menu button here, and we can come all the way down back here to the beginning, or we can jump here to the middle. So the review modules, just what they say, they're there for you to review. You can move around wherever you want to. In the main course, you have to follow the order, the path, and you can't jump forward. That's a real estate commission rule, not mine, okay? So I am going to visit with you here with a picture in a picture, and try to get my if you'll give me 1 second here. Let me put this over here. So I need to put up this screen, and now I need to click. I'm getting the hang of this. So now I need to click my little picture in a picture, and I should have brought that back over. Let me bring this back up again. I'm just going to reposition that. I might be able to reposition that on the fly, but I don't know. There we go. Now it's doing good. Hey, I'm a one-person operation. I don't have my own director yet, but who knows? Maybe someday. Okay. We're on chapter 20. Now, the reason I wanted to go from chapter 7 to chapter 20, when I put my course together years ago, and I updated it, it was with the AMP, kind of the way the AMP flowed. And now Missouri's gone to PSI, and most of the other states I'm in are through PSI. And it doesn't really matter. You get all the information covered. But in my real estate exam coach, my new study aid, I kind of am bringing this into the right sections per exam. What this means is, if you are in the PSI, they have property ownership, land use control, appraisal valuation. So I'm taking my material and I'm in the process of putting it all in the right format, in the right modules. So, and again, I hate to speak negative words, so I'm not going to, this really doesn't affect global real estate school students. But there may be someone on the internet who lives in another state, and they go to Google and they say, I need help passing the real estate exam. Hopefully my real estate exam coach will pop up. They will see this and purchase it. When they log into the course, they're going to say, hey, this follows the same format that PSI follows, and I did very poorly in land use control. That's where I need to do some major studying. Well, they'll be able to go right to that section in my real estate exam coach and focus on where their weakness is. Well, not only did I do that in my real estate exam coach, but I'm doing that in my main course now, just moving some things around to help students understand here's a section you need to go in and review, if that makes sense. So chapter 20 will now be part of module 2, which is part of land use control. I hope that makes sense. Anyway, once everything's in place and put together, I am going to then go to the other testing, Pearson VUE, and use their outline and regroup things for my real estate exam coach to follow their pattern. So anyway, lots of things to do and lots of work going on, but we are going to talk about land use and the control of land. So these are the learning objectives we're going to cover throughout this chapter. We're going to talk about the concept of Uncle Pete. We talked about that yesterday. Police power. And police power, we're going to really focus on it more today. That is building codes and things like zoning ordinances and so forth. Then you have eminent domain. We'll look at that today as well. It's part of this that we want to look at. We have escheat and taxation. I put the last D in front of the T, but taxation, escheat. That's all part of Uncle Pete, okay? We'll explain what zoning laws are and how they protect consumers, define the different types of zoning laws enacted by city governments. We'll explain what happens when zoning laws and deed restrictions conflict. And then we'll distinguish between a developer and a subdivider, which I think is important for you to know. So we're going to move on over here, and we want to talk about land use control and this concept of Uncle Pete. Now remember, as I mentioned yesterday, we own our land in fee simple. Hopefully you could own it fee simple defeasible. What's that? That's when there's some type of stipulation. Remember, can never use it, never sell alcohol on it. Fee simple defeasible. My wife and I bought the blueberry and blackberry farm we bought. He put a stipulation that no other commercial businesses could be used on the farm except for the blueberry and blackberry farm. So that would be fee simple defeasible. And fee simple, absolute, highest type of ownership you can have, best, purest form, fee absolute. So we own our real estate in fee simple absolute. However, we have Uncle Pete, who's Uncle Sam's brother, the government, that can say, well, Mr. Mayfield, we know you own your land and you think you have all these bundle of legal rights, which you do, but there are some government stipulations that Uncle Pete's going to make sure that are enforced. And that's what we're talking about through this whole section. Police power, the government's right to say, here's what you can and can't do on your property. Zoning ordinances. And if you build a property, these are some things you have to make sure are put in place. Building codes, right? Health and safety, welfare. Zoning has a lot of that as well. So police power, the first one that we want to look at, and that's the government's right to regulate the use of land. Now, eminent domain is when the government takes private, and I'd make sure you make a note of that. The government actually takes private property for public use. You mean the government can really take private property for public use? Absolutely. Now, there's three things that need to be met, and we'll cover those in just a little bit. First of all, I'm just going to go over those with you if you want to take some notes, okay? 3 items need to be met for police power. Number one, it has to be for the good of the public, okay? They can't just take private property because they want to. That's the feudal ownership where the king owned all the land, right? So it has to be for the good of the public. What would be some examples of that? Well, it could be a highway, a new highway that's going to go through, and it's going to save people a lot of time. It's going to get us off an old curvy road that's caused a lot of automobile accidents, etc. Good of the public. Number 2, they have to give you due process of law. In other words, they can't just come in and say, we're taking your property. They have to allow you the opportunity to go in front of a judge and a court and to hear your case. I don't want to sell my property, okay? Or I don't think they're giving me enough money. So just number 2, due process of law. And number 3, which sometimes I use as number 2, but just as long as you understand all 3 of these, there's no real order, except I guess the first one, due process, or it has to be for just the good of the public. Due process of law, you have to have your day in court, and just compensation. And what I mean by just is justice. A fair compensation has to be good. Now, I've been a commissioner on several throughout my tenure. I'm in a small community. I've been a commissioner with 2 other commissioners on eminent domain or condemnation lawsuits. The government was actually putting an overpass in, and they were taking property around the overpass to put this overpass in. One of the properties, I kid you not, was for sale. I had it listed at one time, was for sale for like $55,000. And I heard, now I have no idea how to verify this, but I heard from a pretty reliable source because he hired an attorney and fought it tooth and nail, the gentleman who purchased it, and literally got like $500,000 to $700,000. It was a mind-boggling amount of money. His case was, look, it's right on the highway. I don't want to sell it. It's a great piece of property, and he came out very well on that property. Now, the way this worked when I was a commissioner, and this was in Missouri, is the 3 of us would look at the properties. We would hear the people who owned it with their attorneys explain to us why, why they didn't, what they felt it was worth, and so forth. We then looked at comparables. And now keep in mind, the state had already had an appraisal done on the property. And then the 3 of us as commissioners looked at all the information and evidence, and we said, we think this is what they should be paid. And in every case, I thought we were more than fair to the individuals. Now, some of the people wouldn't even talk to me after that because they felt like we were too low. And we all felt like those are good prices they're getting. And so what the government did in this case was they would come to you and say, here's the appraisal we got. Here are the recommendations from the commissioners. And we're going to offer you 2 options. Number 1, if you reinvest the money in the local area, we'll go up. I think they went up like $50,000 above the price we told them. So if we said we thought your property was worth $100,000, the government said if you reinvest in the area, because they didn't want people to get their money and leave, they were trying to get them to stay in the area, they would pay them $150,000 to buy something in the area. If you wanted your cash, you just got $100,000. If you said, I just want to cash out, you got the appraised value. So I thought, and that was one example, and I've been involved in several. The city of Park Hills took a bunch of small homes that were in a flooded area. It's a beautiful little area of Park Hills, and the same thing happened. They offered all of those people, they had appraisals, they had us as commissioners. They offered people, if your home was worth $70,000, they basically said if you buy another home in Park Hills, you had to buy in the city limits of Park Hills, they would give you like $30,000 more money. So if your home appraised for $70,000, you could go and buy a $100,000 home, but you had to stay in the city. If you just wanted the cash so you could go to another city or out in the country, you only got the appraised value. So 3 items: good of the public, due process of law. You get your time in court, you get to hire an attorney, you get to go through that whole legal due process of law. And number 3, there has to be a just compensation. You know, it has to be a fair and just price that they're providing you. Okay? Now, key thing for the exam, key point, you've got to write this down. Eminent domain is the taking of private property for public use. If I drop down here to condemnation, I want you to see here, these are the three items. The formal act, see this highlighted, of exercising eminent domain is called condemnation. Or write in your notes, condemnation is the process for taking the property. Eminent domain is the right. It's the government's right to be able to take private property. Condemnation is the actual process. That'll be on the test. I'm almost could bet you. Now, back over here. So we have police power, building code, zoning, eminent domain, taking private property for public use. The process is condemnation. Don't forget the three things that need to be met. Good of the public, due process, just compensation. Then we have taxation. We talked about that yesterday. That's the government's right to tax your property. And then we have escheat down at the bottom. That's when a person dies without a will and without heirs. Their property would escheat to the state. You probably see that on the test, okay? So, Uncle Pete, P-E-T-E, is the government's right to come in and kind of say, we know you have a bundle of legal rights. We know you own your real estate in fee simple, but I'm Uncle Pete, and I have some control over your land as well, okay? Police power, eminent domain, taxation, escheat. Good job. Don't forget, you can type a question in. I can go out and check those out. I'm going to go out there right now, just see if we have anybody that's asked a question. I'm going to turn this down. So I see Robert. Hello, Robert. How are you doing? Thanks for joining. So anyone who has a question, please be sure and let me know. I want to let Robert a thank you, who saw a couple of things on my Business Tech Guy website. And believe it or not, Shopify did not realize, but there were some updates made to YouTube, so they fixed those videos for me. And I think I have some of the links in the other information. So thank you, Robert, for doing that. I appreciate that. So again, if you have a question, type those in the chat box. I'll be sure and take a look at that. Now, they do like to ask questions about police power. They like to ask questions about, and these are going to be those level 2 questions, okay? When I remember, we have the level 1, that's the recall. Those are the softball pitches. And you might see a level 1 question from this material, but I notice they like to use level 2 questions like, you know, can a person have a pet cougar in their house? Does that fall under zoning or building codes? What do you think that would fall under? I think that's more of a zoning, you know, what zoning would apply to what you can do with your property in that respect. Same way with chickens or something like that in your backyard. So those would be more zoning. Building codes are going to be more about really the safety of the building, the type of windows, the fact that you might need certain sprinkler systems. They're going to make sure all the ADA requirements are met up with the building as well. So just understand the police power are those, and they're generally on local government, although there could be some state police powers when you get around areas that have large lakes or oceans or different things like that. So keep that in mind. Then we talked about condemnation. So I went through that. Again, condemnation is the formal act of exercising eminent domain, or we call that actually the process. So remember that. Taxation we went over yesterday pretty thoroughly. And Sue, I appreciate you letting me know that you, regarding the math, so she was on yesterday. And I realize not everybody can make all of the sessions. I want you to know I'm recording these for you guys. So they're on the channel. If we have one person watching or we have 50 people watching, that's great. I'm just trying to do this to add some value back. And then escheat is when a person dies with no heirs and no will. Again, level 2 question. We'll see one probably coming up here shortly. So zoning falls under the classification of police power. You could have residential zoning, commercial, agricultural, industrial. Sometimes a lot of cities will have like R1 and R2. R1, normally only single family dwellings can be there. R2 might say it's okay to have single family and will allow duplexes. R3 might be single family, duplexes, and 4 families. You might also have C1 and C2. So C1 might be any kind of commercial, but C2 might be an area that is only designated for certain types of commercial businesses. So some even have historical restrictions that they put on, or architectural type zoning. So keep in mind, those are the types of things that fall under police power. The next item we talk about in the course are these two things called a variance and a non-conforming use. Now again, these are level 2 questions. They'll give you a scenario and they're going to throw some information in there and you'll have to apply to that information. So just remember this. A variance is when you go to the city and ask to deviate from the norm after zoning has been in place. A non-conforming use is before. Now, I just thought of this. You know, a lot of times I try to connect little things to remember by, but variance and after. The V is almost at the end of the alphabet, right? And the A is at the beginning. So if you can remember that variance and after zoning was in place, that might help you. Non-conforming use is before. Maybe you could attach the B for before and the C for conforming, non-conforming use before. What would be one of my webinars without my little dog Lucy barking? So there are so many people walking around the neighborhood because of the coronavirus, and they're walking their dogs, and she does not like it one bit when somebody walks by the house. So my apologies. So keep that in mind. Non-conforming use before zoning, variance after zoning. All right. You know, I was on city council for a short period of time when I was back in my 30s, maybe late 20s, and in the city of Deloge. I've always had an interest in politics, and so ran for city council, and I won, and I was kind of excited till I realized that you couldn't please everybody. I mean, people would call me to complain about the silliest stuff, and they had a right to do that. I was their city council person. But we had a lot of situations come up where, and I'm in a small community, but where people wanted to run a daycare in their home, or somebody got their beautician license and they thought they could just open up a beauty shop in their basement. And their husband fixed a side entrance and fixed up the downstairs, and then the neighbors complained and the city sent the police out, and then they would show up at the city council meeting, you know, with tears in their eyes and upset because they'd spent all this money to make this business a part of their home, and they didn't know that. And we're there as city council people, and a lot of these people are our friends, but that's why we have zoning. And so basically they would be coming asking for a variance. And my philosophy was, if you give one person a variance, you're going to have to do that for everybody else that comes along. And so we had to say no. We're sorry, but you should have checked on that before you went and fixed up a beauty shop in your basement. And it was a tough pill for us to swallow, and it was tough to enforce when a lot of these people were, like I said, they had spent a lot of money and they were planning, so excited to run their own little small business out of their home. But would that same person who put that beauty shop in their basement want someone next door to open up a motorcycle repair shop where they were revving the engines all day to check to see how the throttle was working that they had just fixed on the bicycle? Or would they want somebody to put a business next door to theirs who was, crafting? I'm trying to think of a thing where you're hammering on iron or something all day long, or just whatever. No, we wouldn't want that. So, you have to remember a lot of these came about to protect and help and promote property values. Very important in that respect. So a variance allows you to deviate from the norm with regards to zoning. And, I could just give you story after story we had at the city. It was amazing. Every month it seemed like somebody had built a garage over the setback line, or it was just, and so they would have to come and ask for a variance to be able to deviate from that problem. Spot zoning is when you take certain areas of the community and you rezone it for certain things. Like I gave this example before, and it seems like I gave it fairly recently. But when I was in college, even though I did have my real estate license and I crammed 4 years of college into 5, which normally gets a good laugh, but it took me a little longer is what I'm saying. I went to school 1 year at Warrensburg University, and then I transferred to Southeast Missouri at Cape. But I had a friend of mine who lived in Olathe, Kansas, and I would go over and visit him on the weekends. He lived with his sister, and he worked over in Kansas. And Olathe is a neat area. I mean, just a beautiful, beautiful area. And they were putting in a lot of big subdivisions at this time. And you would just drive for miles, and all you saw were homes. Well, out in certain specific spots of the city had spot zoned an area where they could put a bank and a dry cleaners and a convenience shop and some other necessity type things. So that's a good example of spot zoning, where they know that it would be better to zone something out in the middle of that residential area commercial so that it doesn't force a lot of traffic into town, and those people have some areas where they can go. Sometimes even the developer who's planning the subdivision might include that. A buffer zoning is when you have an area that a developer's building, and maybe there's an industrial park or something else close by. Sometimes the city might approve that subdivision plat, but they want the developer to put some type of buffer zone. So you might have a park, or you might have just wooded grass area, or something that would buffer the residential from the industrial, the commercial. That's called buffer zoning. Density zoning, that has to do with really maximizing the number of properties that could be per acre, allowed per acre, and they can achieve the same number of homes but provide a greater degree of open spaces if he or she's allowed to cluster the homes around varying street patterns. So that's in there. And then in the exam, I've heard about them asking what's the difference between a subdivider and a developer. Well, a subdivider buys the unimproved land and splits it up and resells it to other individuals. A developer improves the area by building homes or other buildings. So remember, the subdivider is really buying the vacant land and splitting it up into smaller tracts, where a developer actually is taking that land and improving it with buildings on it, okay? Building codes, and I want you to make a note of this because I love this question. I really should move that up earlier with the zoning, but building codes set the construction standards for building and construction materials for a particular area. Would be everything from the wiring requirements, the sanitary requirements for sewers and pipes. Like I said, could be that you have to have sprinkler systems. Park Hills, another good example of how building codes and Uncle Pete can play a factor. I owned a building in Park Hills, great building. I wish I still owned it today, but I really was kind of forced to sell it because it happened back in my blueberry and blackberry farm days, and I'm not going to get into all of that. I had to liquidate a lot of properties just to keep myself afloat. This was back in 07 and 08. And Park Hills had put in some new commercial building code requirements. I had an older building that was a great building in good shape that had been around for a long time. Unfortunately, when my tenant moved out and I got a new tenant, you had to get an occupancy permit for a commercial lease through the city. That was a new thing they brought in. Well, the city inspector came up and said, I had to put a sprinkler system in. I had to put fireproof walls between each of these offices. I mean, the list was mind-boggling. It was going to cost me thousands of dollars to be able to get that building in good shape, to be able to rent it out and get an occupancy permit. Well, unfortunately, I just had to sell the building because I couldn't afford to make those kind of repairs or upgrades. The city, unfortunately, made the restrictions so strict, they lost most of the businesses in the community, and it really took the community to almost fold because of the loss of so many businesses, that they've now eased and relaxed those restrictions and gone back to where it's a little bit more manageable. But I've already sold my building. But can you see how building codes can play a factor in that police power? So understand what that is. And then we've got this really important point here, and they love this question on the exam. If there's ever a disagreement between the deed restriction and the zoning laws, which one will win or prevail? And it's the most restrictive. If your city says it's okay to have a commercial property and your property is in C1, zoning C1, and you can have any kind of commercial building you want there, but your deed says you can never operate a commercial business on this property, the most restrictive wins or prevails. I see that word a lot on the test. So the deed restriction wins. Even though the city says it's okay, the deed restriction says no. They love these questions. They are level 2 questions. They're a little more challenging because they give you a scenario, and all you have to do is say, whichever one is the most restrictive, it's the one that will win, or which restriction will prevail. Okay? So just remember that. You could very well see that on the exam. Now, bear in mind the city government sets subdivision regulations while the developer creates the subdivision restrictions. By the way, if you're watching this, this is from my course. I am going through and updating some things now, and I know I have a lot of cartoon graphics, and I use those because I think they're easier to remember if you see those on the exam. In my new update, I am using some pictures, but I'm finding I'm still using a lot of these, and there's audio with all of the slides, so you can kind of go through. But here is an example of the most restrictive. So you can see a deed restriction, subdivision restriction, city zoning wins. By the way, on the last slide, down at the bottom, don't forget that city government sets subdivision regulations. The developer creates the subdivision restrictions. Okay, so remember that. Okay, we have a few questions, quite a few. Let's go through some of these, and then we'll call it a day, okay? A deed restriction in a subdivision had created a community playground that used a few square feet from the rear of every owner's lot. And owners began making plans to convert the rear half of the lot to a garden. These plans would require the removal of the park equipment. A neighbor objects to these plans. The neighbor should. Now, John, we haven't covered this in the test. I like to do that occasionally, but we're covering it now. And my philosophy is you're probably going to remember it better because it's a curveball. If you do miss it, and it's okay if you miss it, I want you to remember the information. And I think maybe we did cover this back in chapter 13. However, let's read the answers. Do nothing since an individual landowner has no authority to enforce a deed restriction. I don't know. Apply for a court injunction against the owner's plans. That sounds good, doesn't it? File a les pendens as soon as possible. Now, les pendens means, remember, I'm waiting for somebody to tell me out there. Good job. Robert knew that. I knew you had it, Robert. Lawsuit pending. So you wouldn't file a les pendens. Les pendens just means there's already a lawsuit pending. It's kind of confusing. Inform the owner that the playground is community property. Well, you could do that, I guess, but the correct answer, and you may see this on the exam, is you would file an injunction, apply for an injunction, court injunction. So keep that in mind. A city condemns a 10-foot strip of property owner's land for a public bicycle path. The owner will be able to use the house and most of the lot. Is she eligible for compensation? Yes, because the city is exercising its power of eminent domain. Yes, because the city is exercising its zoning power to her disadvantage. Actually, you won't see any questions with two questions, or you won't see any questions with two answers on the exam. I need to fix that. An owner builds a recreation room into her house. Her neighbor feels the new addition will violate setback lines established by the city in the city building codes. Does the neighbor have a right to request an injunction to stop the construction? And the answer is yes. Under these circumstances, the neighbor may justifiably ask for an injunction. Which of the following is usually true of a subdivision deed restriction that prohibits conveyance of the property by the grantee? That's kind of a level 2 or 3 question. Which of the following is usually true of a subdivision deed restriction that prohibits conveyance of the property by the grantee? In other words, I'm selling you property. I'm the grantor. You're the grantee. And in my deed, I say you can never convey it to someone else. That's not going to be legal. It would be considered void and unenforceable. So the rest of those say valid, but the correct answer is void and unenforceable. Now, what is the difference between a variance and a non-conforming use? Remember, Variance, I'm using that A in the alphabet that I just thought of today, means after, non-conforming uses before. A variance is automatically granted to the landowner. We know that's not true. A variance is not obtained through amending the zoning ordinance. A non-conforming use, well, I don't think that's true. A variance applies to construction occurring after zoning codes had been determined, and non-conforming use applies to construction that occurred before. Read all the choices, and that is the correct answer. So we have several other questions. However, it is 4:47, and I'm going to kind of wrap us up here and just remind you that this is part of land use control. It'll be part of Module 2. We already talked about taxation yesterday, and we really built on the government's rights. So tomorrow's Friday, and I have to be sure and tell you that. There will be no live stream tomorrow. I'm doing 2 webinars throughout the day for associations, and then tomorrow at 4, the Missouri Real Estate Commission asked if I would do continuing some training for the instructors on how to use Zoom webinar. So tomorrow I'll be doing a webinar for the Missouri Real Estate Commission and all the instructors around the state. And I apologize, there will be no live streaming, but we'll pick back up again hopefully next week. I may have to take next week off. In fact, I know I'm going to have to, because I'm doing CE Monday through Thursday. And I'm doing like 2 or 3 webinars throughout the day. So bear with me over the next week. We probably will take a break from live streaming, and I'll put that on my notes, but we'll pick back up as soon as possible. But there's tons of other videos you can watch on the site. Be sure and subscribe to my YouTube channel. Check out the playlist. You can still reach out to me by email if you have questions or need help, but I appreciate your business. Thanks for watching today. And I need to make sure we don't have any questions. Let's see here. Just put that back up. Doesn't look like we have any questions. So, hey, thanks for watching. Be sure and subscribe to the YouTube channel. Check us out at globalrealestateschool.com. And don't forget, check out my little new My Real Estate Exam Coach if you're watching anywhere else in the country. I think it'll help you pass the real estate exam on the first attempt. Have a great day, everyone. Talk to you soon. Bye.